Right, so welcome back to Dane Interviews. Last time we spoke, Jerry, we were talking about exclusively pretty much Back to Neverland for
Right?
my documentary that's coming up, which everyone knows about by now, Beyond the Glass, the WDW animation building out May 24th. Um, so I was like, I was so fascinated by your career and the little bits and pieces that we got into a little bit at the end there of
Right?
our last conversation. I was like, I need to have you back on. So today is the day. So thank you for joining me, my friend.
Cool. Yeah, they're just about to have the 35th anniversary of the of that park.
That's true. Yeah,
And
it's a good time for this conversation.
so yeah, I actually had 7 shows in that one park. Back to Neverland was the first of 7 forays into Disney MGM Studios, aka Disney Hollywood Studios.
Yeah. Is it
So,
your is it your favorite park in Disney World for that reason? Because you have so much personal connection with all those shows that you did.
well, it definitely was a pocket of very intense, creative, personal, and crew expression where we got to get a lot done in a short amount of time. By the time I was ready to have opening day, uh, I was actually shepherding 4 shows at the same time.
Mm.
So I had started on Back to Neverland and then had segued into Michael and Mickey, and Lucas had Katzenberg had asked me to rewrite and direct the piece with George Lucas.
Hmm.
So I wrote Anthony Daniels into the piece, and he flew in. And then they said, "Oh, cool, do the one with Goldie Hawn and Rick Moranis too, and do the same thing, write the script and go shoot it." And so had moved my operation from LA up to Skywalker Ranch, and while I was working with George, and then I was receiving some dailies that were coming up from
Mm.
LA, and then went to Florida and was shooting out there, and then was getting dailies shipped to Florida from the other projects. And by the end, I was working on 4 things at the same time to the finish line. But each one, it was nice that at least at the beginning phase, I got to really have a concerted effort and concentrated moments with the actors and with the crew to get things going. But then while we moved into post production, I was able to then segue onto other things and shepherd the post production needs across those 4. So the on opening day to have 4 shows that were opening on the same day was certainly a fun thing. Uh, and then to receive 2 more shows to do on the opening day, like, by the way, you're not done, keep the sprint going. It's just when you feel like you're leaning into the tape and you're at the end of the marathon, they're like, oh no, there's another marathon right at the end of this one. So
Yeah.
start that one right now. So that one, actually, I'm going to post some footage from part of that uh, tomorrow on LinkedIn. There's George Lucas had asked me to do a story and direction makeover on the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular before he really opened it.
Hmm.
So I suddenly dove into that at his request, and then that same evening, as soon as I had gotten those marching orders, which were great, I was glad to be given that kind of amazing challenge. But later that same evening, Peter Schneider pulled me aside and said, I know you've got a full plate, but," and we started the whole discussion about Cranium Command and doing a whole makeover of that. And so I started pushing into that as well. So tomorrow I'm doing some of the footage of when Rebecca and I were in Florida. I had the Cranium Command
Mm.
first crew with me working in the animation building. So after people would see Back to Neverland, they would come out into the tour and they would look through that first window in this, this is the story department. And it was our team storyboarding Cranium Command right in front of the public. So I have some home video footage of that,
Mm.
and some home video footage of and the reason I took them down there was because I was working in the stunt theater Lucas's request. So I was working with Glenn Randall down there, and I needed to bring my LA crew from Cranium Command to work with me in Florida. So we just used the animation building as our home base, which wound up being a really fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that park. But there's things I love. The Paris park though, Cinemagique was such a
Mm.
glorious creative endeavor with so many people. So I don't know. I love. I think I have something in all the
In
parks
each.
except
Yeah.
gosh, in China is the last place I don't have something. But in Hong Kong and Japan and Paris and LA and
Cruise line, you have
Florida.
something on the dream, right? You have the dream and fantasy, you have the animation show
Right.
on there.
Yeah, Animation Magic with where all everybody coming in, 700 people sometimes can do their own drawing on the placemat when they first sit down at the table,
Yeah.
and
Such a
the
cool
waiter takes
show.
it, and backstage we're scanning it and rendering it into the media. So they get to see Mickey bring your drawing alive as he did the broomsticks in Fantasia, and then start to integrate into classic scenes as well. So
Yeah.
we
Not
have
only is the animator's palette a great restaurant food wise, but that show is so cool because you get to see everyone's the parade of uh of characters that everyone's used. It's just an amazing show.
I have heard people say, in fact, Joe Lancicero was talking about taking some executives to experience that, and he said that you put a pin in their hand and ask them to draw something, and they were terrified. It's like I don't know how to draw anything, but they encourage them, go ahead, just anything. A stick figure is fine.
Hmm.
And when they would see it performing with Mickey and with the different characters, and audiences would usually applaud the crudest little stick figure, like because it's the
Yeah.
underdog that's getting its dream,
Yeah.
and he said that they would use words like empowered. They felt empowered afterwards. They felt like, gee, my little drawing came alive.
Mhm.
So that was fun.
I want to go back to the beginning of your career because you mentioned everything that the seven shows that you've done for MGM, and of course, MGM is my favorite part, or Hollywood Studios is my favorite park. So of course, I want to talk about
Hmm.
that some more.
Right?
But the one thing about your career that I found most fascinating is that you were mentored by Eric Larson all the way
Yeah.
back in the 70s. Um, so tell me a little bit about meeting him and what that was like and when you first fell in love with the animation genre.
Yeah, well, gosh, I was in love with Disney animation from the time I was a kid, and had no idea how to get anywhere near it. Um, I don't know if you realize, but way back they used to have, like at a gas station, at the Gulf
Mm.
gas stations, they had a Disney magazine. At the Gulf gas station, you could go buy the magazine off the rack, and it was Gulf Disney magazine. And I was even doing that, like getting stuff and trying to learn how to draw the characters and sending in the magazine they had, like where you could write letters to them. And I still have some old letters where they answered back and said, well, gee, those are nice drawings, kid, but we're like a magazine and we don't really have anything to do with the main studio. So I was trying to use things like that to reach into the company, and wrote to them, sent them drawings and stuff. And
Mm.
I I was able to talk, like the local uh, church group had a Saturday night event where they allowed me. I talked them into letting me rent Disney animation on 16 millimeter film, and then
Mm.
project shorts, and they called it the Disney Cartoon Parades, where they would ship you three different short films, and they had like a catalog, so I could choose Mickey and Donald and Pluto and cartoons, and then things that were even more significant to me, like Susie the Little Blue Coop,
Mm.
Willie the Operatic Quail, the
Oh, that's a great film.
Rites of Spring sequence from Fantasia. So I was able to get a number of the 16 millimeter films and project them out on a patio at night on a rear screen projection system. So it was a frame that I would unfold and snap on this stretchy screen and then put up the 16 millimeter projector behind it. And it was beautiful to see the color coming off of that, as opposed to TV in those days.
Yeah.
It's just
The little, yeah.
not very good. And to have like 16 millimeter film projected uh, at night on the patio was just wonderful. So I was getting more, and oh gosh, Lambert the Sheepish Lion was another one I remember really loving, and I started to notice a lot of different names, of course, the classic animators' names, but there was also a woman named Thelma Whitmer who
Mm.
I noticed her name on the background paintings. Anytime there would be in the shorts, there was a beautiful forest with dappled sunlight, and I've noticed Thelma Whitmer's name, and so I was appreciating all this stuff and trying to figure out how to do it, and ordered like a couple reams that my parents helped me buy, Cartoon Color Company punched paper,
Mm.
and was trying to learn to animate. And my parents went into halves with me. I did like chores and errands and stuff, and then went in halves to get a Super 8 film camera where you could take a frame at a time. So I was able to film my own animation and check it out. So I was trying to learn that way, and but then my family didn't have much money, and we couldn't afford to keep doing that. So the the pre-punched paper was too expensive. So I went to the audiovisual department for the medical school in town, the Loma Linda Medical Center, and they had an audiovisual department where there was an industrial hole 3-hole punch for Acme paper. And so I asked, and somebody let me come in and punch the paper there, but I got caught by the supervisor, and he was not happy. Like, what are you doing in here, kid? So I told him I was working on animation, and his immediate reply was, "You can't do that."
Mm.
And he had a list of reasons. You need an Oxbury camera stand. You need this. You need that. And like, you can't do that. So, and told me, by the way, stop punching the paper and go. So I had some of it punched, and I left. And my mom was driving me home then. She was waiting at the door. And years later, she told me this. I didn't remember until she reminded me, but she said, "I remember that day. And like, to have this guy tell you, you can't do that with your dream of animation." She said, when you got back in the car and we were driving away, I said, "Well, how does it make you feel that he said that?" And she said my response was, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So she was glad that I still had self-confidence.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring him up is I went back then to try to punch more paper because we couldn't afford to get the expensive stuff. And I asked somebody else that was on the sidelines, and they're like, "Okay, you go ahead," and nobody's using it. So anyway, this guy caught me again.
Mm.
And now he was really demanding, like, "Okay, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I am doing animation at home. I know you said I couldn't do it, but I have a tripod, and I tied weights to it, and I put a ribbon across the living room so it's a hot set." And he's like, "Well, let me see." So I took in a little projector, Super 8 projector, and my animation, and showed it to him on a little cardboard. And he completely changed his attitude.
Mm.
And he immediately was like, "Wait a minute, you did that? That's yours? You didn't trace it?" And I said, "No, I had like animation I had tried to do of the penguins from Mary Poppins." And so anyway, and then he said, "I saw somebody give a talk recently who works at Disney, and the veterans are going to start retiring soon, and so they're starting to look for new people." And he wrote down a phone number
Mm.
and ripped it off and handed me the phone number and said, "This is the phone number to Ed Hansen, who's the production manager at Disney Feature Animation, if you're interested." So the guy who said you can't do it gave me the most important piece of paper
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
in my life. It was the phone number. So I called, and it was the first time I had a clue how to even connect. So I called, and Ed Hansen answered, and I was like 16 years old, and I just said, "Hi, I love Disney animation. I've been doing animation at home and wondered if I could show it to you." And he was very kind and said, "Yeah, have your dad drive you over." And so we did the trek to Burbank. That was like an hour and a half drive for us. And I went in, and Ed took me up to meet Eric, and I didn't even realize the importance of that until
Yeah, yeah,
I put two and two together. Like, oh my God, the Eric Larson. So Eric, they looked at my portfolio, and I had done a lot of portrait work too. I loved like John Singer Sargent and Rockwell and people like that. And I was really trying to do good portrait work. And then I had my animation work, and then sketches I'd done from life while we were camping and stuff. And they looked at that whole portfolio and said, "Great, well, I know you're still in high school, but when you get breaks, can you come in and visit?" And Eric said, "Well, this'll be your desk. So when you have a break from high school, you can come in and do some tests, and I'll give you some pointers." And so it suddenly I had gone from having no clue and having this local guy say, "You can't do that," to suddenly I'm like in the studio. My dad's waiting in the lobby, and I'm like talking to Eric Larson from,
yeah.
gosh, from Snow White days on. And I suddenly have this permission and invitation to go in and train with him. And I'm still in high school. It was in my junior year. And and my parents told me years later too, after I was working at Disney, they said, they used to call us and say, "Hey, does Jerry have another break from school? When is he coming in?" So
Oh
they
wow.
said they were really watching you. So whenever I had a break, I would go in and work with Eric, and Eric was so amazing. He, one of the things he did was introduce me to the idea of rough sketching of ideas and how important that was. I didn't even know the process. When I looked at cell animation on the finished films, I thought that's how the animators drew it, like that clean.
Hmm.
I didn't know there was rough and cleanup and all that stuff. So I was trying to do the most clean thing, and Eric would say, "Well, where are your roughs?" And I would go, "What is a rough?" So he would sit down at my desk and he would show me super roughs. He would take this like fat blue pencil. It was like a 6B blue pencil, Prismacolor or something. And he would show me really rough drawings of things like walk cycles and things, where he would just prove out the shape of it and the motion of it without spending any time drawing details, not even features on the face, just a circle for a head and stuff. And he would flip through and show me like the bold action, and he said, "You got to do this first, and you got to go through like 10 versions of that until you like the action you're seeing. And then once you get it working, now spend the time to make it pretty." He said, "If you start with your first draft being pretty drawings, you're not going to want to throw them out, and you're going to do like a really badly, like a terribly animated scene, and
Hmm.
you're going to treasure it because you took so much time to draw it. You shouldn't do that. You should just do rough ideas, find the idea that's working, now make it pretty." So really important. And also something he really stressed was, look at life, look at your friends, look at nature. Don't just copy what we did. He said, we're flattered that you're looking at scenes from Pinocchio and Bambi and all that stuff. But remember, back when we were doing that, we didn't have other people to look at. We
Hmm.
were looking at deer, and we were looking at life. And he said, "Man, when in Pinocchio there was lightning, and Wooly Reitherman wanted to try to figure out how to animate that." And he said, we were down doing a trip to South America, and we were in a bar, and we'd had a few drinks, and we came out and there was a storm, and Wooly laid down in the, in the rain and looked up at the lightning, and like, that's how to do it. So he said, observe and bring things in from life. Don't just copy other animators' work. And
Yeah.
so that was an important thing. And by the way, that was before CalArts started. So
Yeah.
I finished my junior year, and then I was in my senior year, I was continuing to work with them. And during the summer break, I had more time to go in and visit and do more work with Eric. But then as my senior year was getting close to a finish, they said, uh, we're going to start something the next year. So once you graduate from high school, the very next year, we're starting a college program at CalArts. It's going to be the character animation program. Uh, One of the directors from the shorts that I had, I'd seen a lot of his work, but
Hmm.
one that stood out to me was Lambert the Sheepish Lion, which was directed by Jack Hanna. They said Jack Hanna is going to be your the teacher out there, the main teacher, and then a whole bunch of other teachers for various classes. So, how would you like to be teacher's assistant and help us set up during the summer prior to the school starting to get all set up with materials and everything? And so I said, well, I would love to, but my family cannot afford to pay for something like CalArts, and they just said, well, we'll give you a scholarship. We'll pay
Wow.
for it. So
Yeah, that was my next question. I was gonna say, how'd you get involved with CalArts?
yeah,
Um,
well, they just suggested it, and they shepherded me into that position, and then so as soon as I graduated high school, I spent that whole summer, next summer, prepping for CalArts. So I went and had an office every day at the studio. I suddenly was working there.
mm,
And I was taking phone calls from people that I would wind up going to school with, like, how do you
yeah.
spell Musker? And like Brad Bird, like the like a flying bird, kind of Brad Bird.
Yeah.
Uh, so I was taking phone calls and stuff and getting to know people that I would be going to school with.
I do want to talk about the CalArts class because that A113 class is so
Yes.
synonymous with Pixar, but the Easter egg originally comes from Brave Little Toaster.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about where that Easter egg came from and how that eventually became a Pixar Easter egg?
You know, it just was when I was making Toaster, and it was, it was such a crazy journey to do that. We were just inspired together, our class, CalArts, and it was just it was quite a collection of people. Like all of us, I think, in our hometowns, we were the odd one, the special one, the
Mm.
weird one that did animation, and we really stood out as being peculiar and unique. And once we were all thrown together at CalArts, it was like, yeah, you're all that way. It's like there's nothing special about you. Then people are like, oh, I've seen Pinocchio 10 times. Like, only 10? I've seen it 15 times. And it was a lot of jousting and fun times with each other. And it was such a change for all of us to be around all people like us. And so we socialized, and we were working really hard on the classes and everything. And um, I remember Bill Moore's design class was particularly challenging, and we would typically be working up until the night before class to try to finish.
Mm.
And we had a an agreement that at a cutoff time, I'm trying to remember whether it was 4 a.m. There was some cutoff point where if we were still working on our project by then, we had agreed not to go sleep, but to go have breakfast together and come right back to class with no sleep. And so there was just all this camaraderie, and that just was a indelible part of our experience out there. And when I look at that picture that we just lost Harry Sabin. He died just several weeks ago, and he was responsible for that most famous picture, the black and white shot where he put his camera on a tripod and a timer mechanism, and we posed for that classic photo. Uh, that sort of captured that original guinea pig class in that first year of students, and then more people started joining. But it was a real special thing that we felt, and we all felt really inspired when we went together to see Star Wars when it first came out.
Mm.
And our whole group, it's funny because there was a guy, Neil O'Brien, who's a wonderful writer and producer with NBC, who's writing a book, but he talked to a bunch of us independently, and he said, a lot of you from CalArts, like, when I talked to you, and I talked to Brad Bird, and I talked to John Musker, and I talked to Bruce Morris, it's like all Doug Leffler. He said, all of you have this the same night in your minds that you're talking about when you went together to see Star Wars, and how absolutely blown away you were as a group. And it really, to us, felt like George Lucas and Star Wars, when it first came out, was as disruptive to the film industry as we imagined Snow White and Walt Disney was to the film industry. I mean, that was an extraordinary thing at the time. It was unheard of. And Walt completely took a chance on bankrupting himself and the whole studio on doing something that ambitious. And it was absolutely inspiring. And so we had gotten together because of that inspiration, and we were wanting to do something as a new generation. And when we saw Star Wars together, we went, it's our job to be this disruptive as Star Wars is in the world of animation, and do like the next Snow White breakthrough that lives up to this, what George has done with Star Wars. It's like that. And we hoped to make that happen, and we worked to make that happen. We as we were at the studio working, it was always our enthusiasm and the veterans encouraging us versus what was going on with middle management at the time, and them wanting to sort of do safer things and not take the big risks and not do the big stuff. So actually, by the time Brad and I left Disney to go work up with George Lucas, with Gary Kurtz, who had produced for George Lucas on Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. The reason we did that is because we were all trying to do an animated feature, and we were developing Will Eisner's The Spirit as a potential feature. But it was, Glenn Keane was involved, John Musker was involved, Daryl Rooney, Harry Sabin, there were Daryl Van Sitters, a whole bunch of people were moonlighting, working with us, because we were hoping to do a breakthrough big animated film that would really disrupt the industry in the way that George had with Star Wars, and with the way that Walt had back in the Snow White days. We thought it was our generation, that was our responsibility to try to make something happen. And when that didn't happen, it's like, Gary Kurtz got it. He saw a trailer of coming attractions in pencil test form that a bunch of us had done at night, and he got it. And we were so happy that somebody of his stature and experience would look at, he was working with Spielberg and Coppola and Lucas, and he went, yes, this fits in my canon of work. Like Brad and Jerry and Glenn and John and all these people doing The Spirit belongs with Star Wars and with Empire and with American Graffiti and all that stuff. He tried to sell it in the industry, and studio after studio did not get it. They would read the script and go, oh my God, I can't wait to make this movie. And then they would find out it was animated and go, what? It's animated? Animation is for kids. And we go, no, it's not. And they're like, well, it's we think it's a babysitting tool as animation. And we went, no, not if you make it this way. It'll be everyone will want to come see it, like Star Wars. And they did not get it. Will Hite called me down, shows me he says, here's the novella. It's called The Brave Little Toaster. John was going to try to do it in CG here at the studio. I have now bought, so he got fired. I don't know what the situation was for that, but he said, everybody's telling me it would be a nice short. I really think it could be a feature, but it needs a lot of development. So I think you're the right person to go back and read the novella, start from scratch, and it needs to be developed, written, and directed. And I can offer you that. I cannot offer you hardly any money, but I can offer you that. And I know you've been inspired and trying to make something big, and you were going to make The Spirit, but it didn't happen. So I know you're starving. So he said, the creative part, like where you want to do something, this can really be your own. So what I can't give you in money, I can give you in creative freedom.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you, it's the most creative freedom I've ever had. So he stuck to his word and really uh, let it become just a everyday, a free creative exercise. There was nobody giving notes. There was no sort of gauntlet of approvals to go through for anything. It was just
Yeah.
he trusted me, and the crew came together, and we would work together every day. And when there was a great idea, I could just say, "That's cool, it's in," and it would just be in.
Yeah.
And so in that environment where finally I was getting to, all of us were getting to just really express ourselves. I just went, damn, it's like, this is what we hoped to do when we were going to CalArts together.
Yeah.
And I know this isn't the big Snow White moment, but at least we're getting to make something that doesn't fit in somebody else's box. Like we're experimenting, we're trying something new. And so I went, I'm going to put a hello to my CalArts classmates. So I was coming up with script pages ahead of the storyboarding. So I was also storyboarding along with Joe Rampton, Alex Mann, and
Hmm.
Daryl Rooney, and but I would write a few pages and then hand them out to us, and we would be storyboarding. And then we're running out of pages. I would go lock the door, write a few more pages, hand them out again, and keep going. So when I got to the part where they got to the city in the story, I just went, I'm gonna make a McBean Parkway address, and I'm gonna make the apartment door where the characters arrive at A113. I'm gonna do like a hello to all of my CalArts classmates. So I went ahead and put that in, and then it was fun. Then I heard that Brad was saying, "Oh, it'd be cool to put in something like Family Dog," and Lasseter was wanting to put it in other films,
Hmm.
and so a bunch of us wound up doing that. In fact, I even did it uh, in the ship and the Animation Magic show when Mickey holds up the character drawing to show you the characters that he needs and that you have drawn. On that drawing, the stateroom is A113.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh, I probably noticed that at the time,
it's
but
an
I
Easter egg.
forgot about that. I'll have to go back and look up a POV of that show or
And it was
something.
very cute. The people that were producing it, they coaxed me to do that. They said, "Oh, you've been putting your message A113 and
Yeah.
everything. Go ahead, go ahead." So I did the little drawing. I did like a sort of a primitive drawing, and then I put the A113 as the stateroom number. So every show, when Mickey holds that up, we have the little hello happening there as well. And so it's been fun to just see from our fellow classmates where people will hide it, and it's
Yeah,
just a fun little thing. So there's kind of a community of A113 appreciators.
absolutely.
And like I said, with the opening of the Disney MGM Studios, I was wound up doing 4 in a row, and certain things like the one with George Lucas and Anthony Daniels, which was a film that you would see in the walk around tour.
Hmm.
That one, I filmed it the same week that I wrote it, and I wrote it the day after I heard about it. Um, Katzenberg sent me a video and just said, "Hey, Jer, we did this thing with Lucas. We effing hate it." And only he didn't say effing. Um, and take a look at me. Tell me nobody can figure out what's wrong with it. Call me back. Watch it. So I watched it. I called him back. Said, "Well, here's what I think is the problem with it. Here's what I would do to fix it." He's like, "Great. Write it tomorrow and Thursday. Go shoot it on Friday. Bye." So I did, and in the writing of it, I added Anthony Daniels, who was not in the original at all, and R2, and so he flew in from London, and he arrived late Thursday night when I arrived in town. We were going to shoot on Friday, and he wanted to meet at the hotel at like 1 a.m. I'm like, what? And so I get together with him, and he was leafing through the script and said, "Well, in this point, you have C-3PO say this," and he would say it, and I was thinking it might be more appropriate if he said this. Would that be all right? And I was like, yes, yes, that would be perfect. It's like, you are the character. I just wrote what you might say, but for you to like hone the line is what I dreamed of. That's yes. I mean, oh, good to know. Good to know. Well, on this page, I had another idea. So we went through point after point in the script, and there were these little spots where he wanted to amp it up and everything, and I loved that. I welcomed that. I was so glad that he was so involved with it that first of all he didn't want to record lines and send them and have somebody else get in that suit. He
Hmm.
wanted to fly in and squeeze into that thing himself and perform the lines well. And so, I was doing crazy stuff like that, and I would talk to some of the guys, and they would be like, "Oh my God, I would go nuts if I had to do that." And you go out onto a live set, and like when I was doing Michael and Mickey, and they're like, "Oh God, it's like it would drive me nuts where you've got like 100 people, and you have to know that like if something goes wrong, you have to solve it right now. Otherwise, you don't make your day, and the film goes bankrupt." And so it's like I'm happy to take 5 years and do something slow and plan it out. And it's like I don't want to go near that kind of crazy high blood pressure situation. And for some reason, I always just thrived on being in a moment that was kind of heightened like that, and where the kind of the blessing of that, I think that happened, Dane, was it's like in some of those cases, like the one with Lucas, somebody else had been tasked with doing it and had gone through committees and more of the longer timeline and everything, and it had come back to be something that they didn't like. Um, by the time they handed it to me, Katzenberg just did the personal call, heard my pitch on the phone, and said, "Go do it." So I didn't have all of that stuff. I didn't have like the committees to go through and script
Yeah.
notes coming back and all that stuff. I I pitched an idea. The executive said, I like your approach, go. Then I wrote, then I had my actors, and the actors wanted to participate and heighten the moment. I welcomed that, and we just did it. And the first thing I did was took a few scribbled storyboards to George, and I apologized to him for daring to direct a director that I so admired. And he was so nice. He just said, "No, I absolutely welcome this." He said, I last time there was a committee, and I'm glad they sent a director this time."
Yeah.
He said, I agreed to be in this, not to direct it. So I want to be directed. What do you need?" So he was just great and to work with. And Anthony Daniel was great. Uh, and Linda Ronstadt was there and helping out with the kids and stuff. And she helped me get George into better wardrobe. Sometimes he'd come in, "What do you think? The little checkerboard?" And she'd like, "No, I think the beautiful teal shirt is better." Okay. And so those kind of things where the studio got used to sort of throwing me at situations that were where they saw this could be a train wreck, but it could be saved.
Hmm.
And who do we know that can try to be creative and to be a good team player to go in and just face whatever and come out with something that we would like. Uh, so it's kind of the blessing and curse of the curse is you have very little time and sometimes the part of the resources are gone, but the blessing is you have a lot of creative freedom
Yeah.
to really make something fresh and make it work. So that got to be sort of a habit. And the one on the ship, Animation and Magic, I don't know if I mentioned that to you before, but I had been outside of Disney trying to get a Secret Life of Graffiti project off the ground for over a decade.
Oh,
And
really?
that whole thing of having drawings that somebody else would do, bringing them to life, I had done previs on it with After Effects as my tool that I could manipulate at home and approximate what a system could do. But I had tried again and again, and it like didn't quite find a foothold, and didn't quite find a foothold. And then I got uh, like they didn't even know I was working on that, but I got a call like, "Hey, Jer, we've got a situation. It's another one of those buzzer beater things. We're cutting steel on the ship. We don't have the show. We've got a space, a beautiful space, but there's no magic moment show." And that we never do that. We always plan the magic moment first and then build around it. This time, just circumstance. They got to cut the steel. They got to make the ship. Now we're stuck with them already making it, and we don't know what the magic moment is. You got any ideas? And so I went in and met with them, and when I saw like, oh my God, it's going to be a replica of the beautiful Art Deco animation environment that were, when I went in and met with Eric when I was 16,
Yeah.
that was where we were. That's where Eric worked. That's where they let me work, and all of us coming out of Cal Arts, we worked in that kind of space. So I went, oh my God, if that's the environment, why don't you have drawings come alive as the magic moment? And I showed him the footage. I didn't tell him it was 10 years old or 12 years old, but I showed them and they were like, oh my God, that could be cool if the drawings came alive. And then I asked them to give me drawings. I made a little template thing for them to draw into, and then I rendered their stuff in. So
Oh yeah.
that really made them fall in love with it. And I used a mock-up that ultimately we didn't get copyright permission to use in the final, but it was part of what sold it to people like Marty Sklar and Eisner and the whole band. Was I took the Dick Van Dyke dancing with the penguin scene in Mary Poppins, and I painstakingly took out the penguins and then replaced them with the drawings that were dancing with him. And I prearranged everything so that I could just accept drawings from the staff at Imagineering, and then scan them in on my system and overnight render them, and the next day take them in their drawing dancing with Dick Van Dyke. And so they were like, oh my God, we got to have this. Ultimately, I wish we could have used that scene in the final experience, but
That would have been really cool.
copyright didn't allow that. But it was part of the sales pitch. So, once again, that was one of those things where when you go have the experience, as it should, it just feels natural. Where you go into the space, it's an homage to that classic era of animation and the beautiful furniture where those ideas were born, and you get to make drawings come alive. And your audience perception is this is always what it was meant to be. It feels that way, but it almost wasn't.
Yeah.
But since I had been working on something for a decade, and then they called and said, help, we need a magic moment, those things found each other, and then it became like meant to be. So yeah, maybe fate meant that to be, but it wasn't the carefully laid plan.
And you very much became like the cleanup guy for these projects that weren't really working, it sounds like.
Well, and it was sort of like the fixer.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is it wasn't just polishing what was there.
Yeah.
In the case of Back to Neverland, for example, it was we unplugged the other two things entirely and started from scratch. So
Hmm.
it
And then didn't you do that with Indie too? That was that kind of the same thing, or did you
well
kind
now
of
with Indy,
flip that?
that was a unique situation because that we're with Back to Neverland, it was starting from scratch. Like
Yeah.
casting Robin was something I brought in and had to convince them of, and that took some doing. But ultimately, they fell in love with him and animation and cast him in Aladdin afterwards. So I
Hmm.
was glad to see that happen. But with Indy, that was much more of a big evolved thing that had taken years to come into place, and yet George saw it and just wasn't satisfied to open it to the public. And so I had just done the short film with him.
Yeah.
So I had done the Robin film. So, people had gotten to see that. They had seen Michael and Mickey. They had seen the other two shorts I'd done with George. And so George personally called me over on that opening night where he was standing with Eisner and Katzberg and Lucas. It was the three of them standing together and gesturing me over and gives me the assignment in front of that was those three guys. So Eisner and Katzenberg are listening while Lucas is telling me, I want you to go fix this thing. Of course, you couldn't do a from scratch thing. A lot of it is built and you've hired a bunch of people and everything. But he said it needs a makeover. And I said, well, I've never worked like an over 2,000 seat theater with a live audience and stunt people. And he said, look, it needs story and showmanship. You know how to do that. Fix it. So I went up and met with him and chatted some more about it. But I went in and in that case, it was really intriguing. It was taking things like, I looked at their script, and they had things like, there was a scene where there's the car that the truck that gets hit
Mm.
and turns over and explodes, and they go up, and our actress comes out of it alive, thankfully.
Mm.
Um, but in the original script, that wasn't a point of tension at all. It was, uh, they explained to the audience, we do these stunts where we trick people. So she's actually not in it. We have a fake truck that's going around. She comes through this opening, and it's all a fake thing. Now let's watch the fake thing happen. Um, I looked at that and went, well, that's boring.
Mm.
So what I proposed in that situation was, don't tell the audience that. Tell the audience it matters to time these things right because you want everybody safe. So have the guy that's setting up the explosives be careful, and have the actress realize that, we got to hit our points, and the guy that's doing the weaponry, like, this all has to be timed just right to pull it off. So we want everybody to hit their marks and keep everybody safe today. And then you go around, and instead of it being safe, it explodes, it goes over, it catches on fire, and they rush up and they do the fire extinguisher. She comes out of the haze. And then you reveal to the audience, like, okay, we got you. We actually, we have our methods, and this is what we did, but wasn't your heart pounding. So it totally inverted this. Instead of like, hey, I'm going to show you how the magic trick works before I do it. It was like, no, make them care about her and think she got exploded, and then reveal that it was a trick. So it was a very different experience. And so George came and watched where I'd taken a whole bunch of those measures with the
Mm.
script to just deal with the timing and the pacing and the emotional feel of it. And after I did the retooling of the story, and then had the wonderful thing of working with Glenn Randall, who at the beginning of this process, there was suggestion that Glenn be invited off the show and that I would go replace him. To which I replied, "You're crazy. Glenn Randall is a genius stunt coordinator, and I would definitely keep him in place. I'm just going to go there to clear the pipes and to retool the storytelling. I want him exactly to be the wise man of real life stunt people that have to be performing here. The people's lives really are at stake, and their health really is at stake with this. So let's keep him on." So I was able to do that, but then went in and assured him that I was there to clean the pipes and to make sure everything would work well. And it was interesting because they were this the park wanted it to limp through a few iterations of showing the public something. So there were 2 or 3 shows a day, which George hadn't approved. So it wasn't fully open. And then they were trying to workshop some ways to fix stuff. So I went in and made the argument, look, we've got some ideas of how to fix it now. I had done the story retooling, but we needed significant new rehearsal and shaping of everything. So my argument was, instead of sharing like some of the old show and spending part of the day on the new show and going back and forth, we just shut the whole thing down for a couple of days and work really fast to get the new show fully rehearsed and on its feet, reviewed by George, and then open the thing. And there was a real pushback. So we had a meeting where Eisner flew in, and he listened to one group in the room say, "We insist that it keep going status quo right now, and that if it takes a few months to get this new thing happening, it happens." And then for me to say, like, "No, I think we should bite the bullet and shut the thing fully down, and then put it on a fast track to learn the new thing. And we might be done in just a couple of days if you let us have the space, and then open it fully new soon instead of taking many months." Eisner said yes to my proposal. And so, Glenn and the actors got to really focus on rehearsing the new thing then. And so it was really nice to sort of clear the path for them to have just one thing on their minds, and it was the new shape, and really work on that. And then we got George came in and reviewed and went, okay, this side will open, and then we got the full opening, and so that was a very different thing. It was trying to preserve as much as possible about just obviously the physical stuff that had been built and the people. But it was funny that the some of the people, like the guy who was the demolitions expert, who's
Mm.
responsible for the explosions that seem to go wrong, and everybody rushes to put the fire out and save her. Like those people that had been cast for comedy, and they originally were just yucking it up and giving away the secret before it happened. I had them doing drama. And so they were like, wow, this is kind of crazy. I'm a comedian who was hired to do comedy, and now I'm doing a dramatic scene, but this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
So it was taking the people and the props and everything that were there, but putting it through a new story filter and a new pacing filter and everything.
Mm.
And so anyway, when George had said, come on, storytelling, showmanship, you know how to do that, go. Then he came back and reviewed and went, okay, you did it. Let's open it. So that was a very satisfying, crazy ride. And then I got to focus entirely on Cranium Command after that. And
Well, that was my next question actually is
yeah,
I know how you got brought in because was it um Marty or somebody in Imagineering brought you in to
uh,
see it and was like, this is not working, right?
yeah, it was actually Peter Schneider.
Peter Schneider.
Um, yeah, he gave me the news the same night that George had said, I want you to go fix this stunt theater. So Peter was aware of that I had just got that assignment, and said, I know you have a full plate, but we have this thing. It's called Cranium Command. Um, Colossal Pictures was hired to do it. And Colossal Pictures is a great place. They did a lot at the time, a lot of innovative MTV IDs. In fact,
Mm.
Henry Selick had done some of their more classic stop motion IDs going in and out of songs on MTV back in the day. So I knew the place had a good reputation, but they said, we hate it. We're firing everybody. Uh, Nobody can quite put their finger on what's wrong with it. Take a look at it and see what you think. So I went and watched. So I wound up on a conference call with Eisner and Katzenberg and Marty Sklar and Tom Fitzgerald, and might have been a couple of other people. And so my basic thing was to say, well, first of all, it's really patronizing in the way it's written and performed. And I think even a 6-year-old would be embarrassed to watch it because
Mm.
it's so patronizing to the audience. So first of all, I think you need to rethink that.
Yeah.
And part of it not being patronizing is to not tell you, I'm going to teach you a lesson. It's to have that be an adventure first and learn things along the way. And second thing is, I said, they have these eye screens and they're only using them once in a while. And it doesn't feel like I'm there on a ride riding inside somebody's head. It's just they're off until somebody says, let's remember what happened at school yesterday at lunch. And then the eyes would come on and it's like, hey, Bobby. And they do some little moment and then the eyes would go off and it's like, so you learned. And so I'm like, they're just obviously screens that they're using to teach me things once in a while. I said,
Hmm.
if you take it the opposite direction to go, when those eyes open, you are riding inside of a head, and just do continuous point of view and try to make a movie that never stops and all connects. And there's only one point where you're hitting the face with lasagna, I think, and or yes, I think it's lasagna, and so it blocks out your eyes momentarily. But for the rest of that, I said, let's take that theater and make you feel like you're riding inside of a head. So that, like, get rid of the patronizing, hide the lessons in storytelling and adventure, and then make it a ride instead of a theater with extra screens. Those are open eyes, and you are riding inside of that head.
Yeah, that theater is really impressive for
Yeah.
the time
And
that it was made.
part of the thing was and then the third thing is, I said, I think it'd be great to not have a bunch of animation inside the head. Instead of animating a Charles Grodin type, why don't we have Charles Grodin himself and John Lovitz, and not instead of like somebody voiced by John Lovitz. I want to see John Lovitz, and just make it a crazy Terry Gilliam wild sets. And
And
so
was Buzzy Captain Cortex at this time too?
it was originally called Cranium Commando, and
Yeah.
yeah, it had a bunch of old stuff attached to it. And so I got to really roll up my sleeves and go back into shake up the story, how to completely retell it. And so our group that came along, so Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale and Daryl Rooney and Rebecca Rees, and that they all gathered in the animation building in at Back to Neverland, on that tour, and started storyboarding that. The team really was doing good story work, and so we got to really go back to square one with story, and then just and use the theater in a much more dynamic way. As soon as you went, this is a continuous ride. Now the Buzzy on the pendulum, I would try to have it move counter to what you're seeing. So if through the eyes you're going to the right, I would have it swing to the left as if it was a centrifugal force
Mm.
that was moving it around. So it would reinforce the idea that you were inside of a moving kid's head.
Yeah.
So now the theater worked in a more dynamic way to feel like you're going somewhere. Um,
I've got a question about the story that I haven't heard much about. So as far as I know, Buzzy was originally named Captain Cortex. So where, and I don't know if you're the guy to answer this question or not, but when you were doing the storyboarding and everything, where did the name Buzzy come from?
Gosh, I don't recall exactly where Buzzy Bobby came from, but it was I didn't want to use the same uh, person that was cast in the original where all the patronizing stuff happened, and I needed somebody who would uh, be able to do the hands and the reflections of the kid and coordinate with our crew as we were shooting, which is really hard. And part of my footage is the auditions that I did for many kids to see if they could coordinate with a camera operator to be effectively the hands of the person whose eyes you're seeing out of. So coming down to the table, and when you look at the plate, to have the hand bring the food right up to the
Mm.
camera as if you're seeing from the eyes of the character. That was difficult. In those days, we had heavy camera rigs that had enough footage to go for long takes, and the kid had to exactly go to the right spot during the take because I couldn't use pieces. I had to use long extended periods, and everybody had to hit their marks.
Yeah,
So
couldn't
I was
do
looking for
editing.
a so I was looking for a kid with those kind of skills, and it just so happened that Scott Curtis wound up being, had the ability to perfect instincts for that, and had a great voice and was a good actor. So when I had his reflections on screen, he was great. So then having him do the voice of Buzzy and to be Bobby himself, just suddenly everything came together where it's like one actor was doing all of those aspects of the character, and then it worked beautifully.
Uh, um, now I'm sure you've been asked this before. Um, but I just want to get your thoughts on it real quick. And everybody has an opinion on this, and it's been talked about a
Hmm.
thousand times over. So a couple years ago, the Buzzy animatronic went missing. So do you have any
Right.
thoughts of that whole ordeal?
No, I don't. I'm mystified. I must say that I saw a sort of a pirate video
Hmm.
a while before that happened, where somebody had snuck into the space, and it might have been 4K uh, at the time. That was kind of new,
Yeah.
and they crawled around in the theater in the dark, and in little pools of light you could see our characters there, sort of sadly sitting in the dark with just a little pool of light, and
Yeah. With the
and there was
little
a
tag,
tag.
tag for the archives. Yeah.
Yeah, and the tag on the archives I think was "Do Not Destroy" or something to
Hmm.
with hypothalamus or some,
Yeah.
and then they actually crawled into the stage workings. Like I never did that. I
Yeah.
worked in the theater, but I never crawled behind the mechanism. Um, and but they didn't hurt anything. It's like they went
Yeah.
in and did the pirate tour, and I know that's not allowed, but I was pretty excited to see it, and I was glad they didn't hurt anything, they didn't touch anything, and
Mm.
so that was the kind of sort of invasion that seemed harmless ultimately, where I just liked being reminded of the characters. I liked sort of the secret peek, and I felt
Sure.
frankly sad for them sitting there in the dark all these years. Um, but no, it was rather shocking when I heard about the theft, because those are big. Those are big, heavy.
They're big and big
Buzz,
and heavy
Buzzy is
animatronics. Yeah.
giant. Buzzy's head is huge.
Yeah.
And when you see in my behind the scenes footage the woman that's putting the hat on him, and she's up on a cherry picker to go up high enough to put the clothes on him and stuff, you can see like, oh, he's giant.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was surprised they could even pull it off. And I'm not sure the current status. Did they recover the clothes but not the figure? Or how does
Yeah,
it
they
stand?
recovered. Yeah, they recovered the clothes, the gloves, the hat, but the figure and hypothalamus, I think is still. I think hypothalamus is still missing. He's either still missing or they found him in the archives or something. That's the last I heard. But
Huh.
all I know is that both of the animatronics are still currently gone. Um,
Wow, that's
it's
that's pretty
very
crazy.
strange. Yeah, because it's been like 5 years now. It's crazy that it's still they're still
I
completely gone.
I don't have a clue how something that's significant in
Yeah,
size and weight could be moved without some kind of security camera
yeah.
footage.
Picking it up or something. Yeah.
It seems like someday there will be a movie about how that happened, like a Mission Impossible
Yeah. Yeah.
film.
I think there is supposed to be a documentary somewhere being made on that. Um, I thought I
Well,
saw
I
something like that that there was in the works somewhere that
I
it's
don't
gonna be
know.
something like that.
It's pretty crazy. I mean,
It's insane.
I completely understand people being fascinated and fans of props and characters and all that good stuff. In fact, there's a uh, gosh, the wonderful Richard Kraft. He's a very creative producer and writer and everything else, and director. Uh, has been an avid collector of so much Disneyana, wonderful props. I think he auctioned a lot of it off though, not that long ago. But I was shocked with it becoming a moment of thievery rather than collection.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's crazy. So I do want to talk about some of the other projects that I personally have not really heard you talk. I'm sure you talked about them, but I haven't really heard you talk about this kind of stuff. So speaking of crazy things, scariest Disney attraction ever made, you worked on Alien Encounter. So tell me a little bit.
Extraterrestrial alien
Yeah.
encounter.
Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about how you got involved in that and your like mindset on creating a scary Disney attraction
Well, it
or product.
actually it was a really fun idea that it was hearkening back to the days where you'd have 3D glasses in the movie theater and
Mm,
shocking devices in the seat to give you a shock when things would happen on the movie screen. So it was meant to be sort of a tongue-in-cheek hearkening back to the days of spooky theater experiences. Um, and everybody I cast was comedian.
mm.
I mean, everybody in there. In fact, Jim Jackman, who's the voice of Plugsy in The Brave Little Toaster and was a Groundlings improv actor, is the voice of the guy who gets eaten, who
Oh,
comes in
really?
and gets. Yeah, the guy who gets eaten is a comic from the improv Groundlings Improv Theater who did a toaster voice. And so yeah, everybody, and Kevin Pollak and Kathy Najimy, who we were on a reunion show talking about it, and again, brilliant comics. And so yes, it was spooky, but and Jeffrey Jones and like everybody was had a comedic approach, and so it was all meant to be in that spirit of let's have fun with something scary because we know
Yeah.
it can't really hurt us.
Yeah.
But it was really impactful.
It's legitimately scary. I went on the Stitch's Great Escape version of the ride because it's
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
they reused a lot of the elements, but um the that attraction, looking back on it through video, is legitimately terrifying.
Well, people scream, and it sounds like you're on a roller coaster, and everybody's
Yeah.
perfectly still. But there was, we went through two phases because when I was first invited onto it, they needed all the media directed, but
Mm.
the physical stuff, like where the animatronics and the lighting and all the stuff in the room, um, we had been years in development and was well underway. In fact, I think they had like 6 or 7 years under their belt with building the mythology and all that good stuff. Um, so when I came in, first it was I'm going to direct all the media, all the acting, all the voices you're going to hear, and everything, and time the show, and so that's where I started. And there were things like Spinlock and Dr. Themis were just names I come up with late at night when I was working on the script, and for Spinlock, I was thinking of actually like a combination lock where you spin it to get rid of
Mm.
the number. And Themis, I went kind of, well, it's almost like a femur bone and stuff. So I just was having fun improvising and playing and trying to carve the story out in a fun way. And so that's where I started, and I filmed all that stuff and worked with Don Thorne, the cinematographer, and he had great experience on a lot of big movies, and he brought in a techno crane so I could move the camera all around and follow Kevin Pollak when he was running around the set. And so I finished that part, but I was raring to go do the install, and for some reason the team that was on it was like, no, thanks for the media, we've got the rest of it handled. By I was like, what? I was so used to taking everything to the final finish line and the final
Yeah.
install and everything, and they're like, no, we got it covered. And but we had some differences of opinion where they're like, well, then the lights go out and people will be thinking, what happened to the to Chairman Clinch, and they might be thinking about what is on the planet, and they would go all to the stuff. And I said, if I'm just a guest and I've come in and all the lights go out, I might just think the ride broke
Yeah.
because I don't have 7 years of creating a story. I'm coming here, I don't know anything about it, and I just went on 6 other rides, and I've got somebody with my baby and the stroller outside waiting for me, and like I'm not thinking about Clinch. I just think your ride broke down because sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
So they're like, no, 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 it's fine. We've got it covered. So I I was sort of sad and went, well, darn, okay, well, on to the next one. And then I got a call, and Marty Sklar and Tom Fitzgerald and Michael Eisner had gone to see it and just said, this isn't a show yet.
Mm.
And so they said, Jerry, you got to go like really do the whole thing. So then I got an invite from them, from the top guys, to say, okay, this guy's going to drive it. So I went in with producer who's also a writer director in his own right that's amazing, Rick Rothschild. But he was going to be my producer for the duration while I directed the rest of the show. So we flew down there and we went, well, let's see what this is. It's like I directed the media, but I don't know how they installed it, and let's go experience it. So we went through and watched it and came out, and over about a half hour time, we made a series of notes about
Mm.
change this, shape that, blah, blah, blah. And really that was about the plan stuck. It took us 6 months to implement it, but what we planned in that one viewing and the half-hour planning really remained the good blueprint to go
Wow.
with. So I got to really carve it out, shape it up, make the story much more clear, test it with audiences, and we had things happen like we would bring people in, and it was funny, Dane, because it was we were testing during a really hot part of the summer in
Yeah.
Florida, and it was just like the humidity and the heat was terrible, and they'd go out and find people to come do a test ride on our attraction, and they didn't know what they were getting into. But we'd see these people come traipsing in, and they're just sweaty and they're melting and they're just sort of shuffling their feet. and they go in, and then they go into the space, and it's super air conditioned,
Yeah.
and they start to cool down, and then they start to have their adrenaline start running, and then they're laughing, and then they're screaming, and then they get really revved up, and they're shrieking, and they get hit with liquid a couple of times in that air conditioner environment. One is with the quote unquote blood that falls
Uh-huh.
on them from the worker who gets eaten. And then they get a face full of bug bits, we called it, where when the creature is exploded, everybody gets
Mm.
a face full. And so they're like, they have like a spritzer in their face, and they're super chilled down, and their adrenaline is pumping. And when people would come out of the ride, they were leaping and bounding and laughing and talking, and it was just like we were made like a rejuvenator machine for humanity. It was like all these melted people would come out like springing around and talking. And then we had people get in touch with us that worked in the park, that were approached a number of times. They told us it was significant enough to report to us, where they were approached repeatedly by senior citizens
Mm.
who would particularly point out how much they loved it.
Oh, wow.
So we're like, why would that be? And then I thought maybe it's because we kept them perfectly still in a seat, and we
Yeah.
put the restrainment on. We didn't give them whiplash. We didn't put them on a roller coaster and like make their neck hurt.
Yeah.
But we gave them all the thrills of a roller coaster ride while they were perfectly still and protected. And maybe that was the reason why. But it was really interesting that they bothered to mention it enough where the park gave that feedback to us.
Mm.
But Rick and I would sit in as we were testing, and things would happen like this. This one time, the plan originally that I did for the blood coming down is when the guy gets eaten and his helmet cam goes to black when he's crunched, um, you have the splatter, and the splatter was supposed to hit everybody in the whole audience. And Rick and I are sitting in the dark, and the mechanism misfires that one
Mm.
show, and it doesn't hit us at all. And off in the distance, we hear people screaming. That made everybody on our side of the pitch black room way more scared.
Mm.
And then it fired late and hit us, and people screamed twice as loud. So when the lights came up, Rick and I go, that stays in. And we programmed it so it always hit half the audience. So the other half would wonder what happened to them,
Yeah.
and then it would hit them. So we just tried to heighten the fun of that experience and the crazy, scary thing. And then Tim Curry, who did the voice of
Oh, yeah.
Sir,
This
the
movie
robot
was
that
great.
pitches it. Yeah, I had Phil Hartman do another version of it, but
Oh,
ultimately
that's right.
Tim came out, and on the second phase of the show where I really got to drive the installation in the park, I had Tim Curry do the final voice for that, and I basically told him to think of himself as an evangelical preacher, sort of like
Mm.
the evangelical preacher of tech, of excess tech. And so he really did a great job with that. And then Doug Griffith, who is my animatronic animator, did a brilliant job at doing all the gestures and stuff for that. And so we had just a really fun time putting that whole thing together. And so we finally got it revved up and installed. But gosh, what's his name? Bran Farron, who's quite a genius, who actually ran Disney R&D for a while, wound up coming in and doing audio work with us. And that was part of our 6 months, is we wanted to really amp up how audio helped tell the story. And so he came in and did some things like a speaker array around the top of the theater, where it was many, many speakers that were in a ring.
Mm.
And so you weren't just doing a stereo mix. You'd go from speaker 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you would have this sound of the creature fly around the theater. So some really crazy amped up things like that. And so we had a great time doing it. We put an age warning up front.
That
Didn't
people
want,
ignored.
and that people ignore it. And I actually talked to someone who said I was too young, the age warning, and my parents took me in anyway. And I'm like, oh my God, did you survive? And she's like, I actually love the show. Um, but yes, I remember working with several people who were just the right age where they were like 6 or 7 years old. Their parents took them in anyway. And they made it through without being too scarred.
Yeah. The last project I want to talk to you about here is one of my favorite attractions. And Cranium Command is literally probably one of, if not my favorite attraction of all time. But Rock and Roller Coaster is easily my favorite roller coaster in Disney World right
Mm,
now. And you did the pre-show, which is
right.
one of the most iconic pre-shows in all of Walt Disney World. So, um, and also one of my favorite bands is in the attraction, Aerosmith. So,
Yes.
what were Aerosmith like on set filming that? I imagine they were great to
They,
work with.
they were great. But there was a huge challenge to anybody working on that set. And just if you go through the experience, you'd have no way of knowing this. But we were shooting uh, 60 frames a second at IMAX size negative. Uh, and it was a challenge to keep the depth of field so that you had focus held all the way from the foreground all the way to the not just the background of that room, but when you open the doors all the way up into the alley with the limousine, that all of that be kept in focus on a giant negative at 60 frames a second, which means you had to pour huge amounts of light into that space. Just crazy. And in fact, we had to warn the city about the power grid took a real hit when we would
Mm,
turn that stuff on. And we did test footage beforehand with another band to stand in for them.
mm.
And it was just so hot. And uh, the couple people that were closest to some of the lights had to wear safety contacts to make sure their eyes wouldn't be damaged.
Yeah.
And it was just like the hottest day in Death Valley. And it was just unbearable. And I just realized once we got this thing working, and it was just horrid heat, that I didn't want to be them in front of the camera doing that. I thought they will hate this. They will absolutely go nuts. And if I don't tell them about it, they will want to kill me. So I said, I have to let them know what they're up against. This is insane. Nobody should work under these conditions. So I saw that one of their wardrobe people was visiting, Aerosmith's wardrobe people.
Mm.
And I told her, come over and I want you to feel these lights. She's like, no, 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 I've felt like, I said, no, no, no. This is a whole different thing. You have to feel this. And so I had them turn the lights on while we were standing there, and it's like came up, and then it was just searing hot. And she ran off the set and went to a phone and called them and like, holy F. She was like screaming. And so when the guys showed up, it was they had just performed on the Academy Awards, so I was talking to them about the
Mm.
performance and how much I loved it. And then they segued immediately to, okay, where's the oven? We got to go feel the oven. And so we took them over to it, and that's the first thing they wanted to do was like, we heard about this. It's legendary. What are we up against? So I went and stood them in the space and turned it on, and it was just horrid. And their attitude was, we're going to make it work. Like, we're going to tough it out. We're going to go
Yeah.
through the flames. We're going to walk through hell. They took it on. And so it was the cutest thing. The producer put together a shirt that said "We survived Rock and Roller Toaster," and it had the flame on the guitar and stuff. And they made shirts for them to wear. But they showed up, and then I said, okay, now not only is it horrid heat, but I can't put pieces of this together. So the whole thing has to be done in one take.
Mm.
So we can't say, well, you blew one line in this one, so I'll use part of this take and part of that take. Can't
Yeah.
do that. Has to all be one continuous take. So all the way to the very last line, it all has to be perfect. So now and and by the way, um, because we're filming with the at 60 frames a second with the giant negative, it's so noisy going through the camera that even with sound baffling around the camera, it's so noisy that it is going to ruin all the audio that we do today. But you can't phone it in and kind of do a lackluster performance, because you cannot dub a good performance over a bad one. You have to do your
Yeah.
best performance, knowing that I'm going to have to re-record every line you say later. I'll come meet you in Boston, and we're going to have to loop this whole thing from scratch, because we know going in, all of the audio is ruined today. And if you blow a line, I have to throw away the whole roll of film,
Mm.
because if we get like 20 seconds in, there's not enough film when you're going 60 frames a second giant negative. It's a big roll, and you're churning through it really fast, and there's not enough for a second take for that long piece. So basically every take is an entire roll of film, and they didn't tell me how big the stack of rolls of film was in the back. I didn't know how many takes we could do. So it was very high pressure. Remember what I was telling about, some of my friends were saying, like, I like doing like the 4-year, 5-year movie where you
Yeah.
plan it. I don't want the tension. Boy, did we have the tension. It's just, so my main task was, so everybody knows the bad part. Everybody knows this is crazy, that it's going to be hard to do this. So my job was like, take away the fear, make them comfortable, find ways for them to say the line where it's easy to remember it, say it in a way that feels comfortable to you. Even though there's every reason to panic, don't panic. It's like we will believe in ourselves. We'll find a way to do this. So a lot of it was trying to guide them to find ways to hit the performance moments they need, and to find a way to trust it and not freak out. And we finally got our prime take where everything worked.
How many
And
takes did it take?
I don't recall how many, and I don't know how many rolls they had left behind the curtain. I do not know, but I knew it was finite, and if we ran out, we were screwed. And we found the magic moment. And I remember, like, we'd rehearse, and the guys were trying to remember ways to, they would forget lines, and I'd try to find
Mhm.
ways to help them remember the line or reword it a little bit. And everybody finally got into a groove, and we found the sweet spot, and we survived. And then I went and met with them in Boston later to do all the looping,
Yeah,
replacing all the voices.
the voices.
And they were so glad they had put everything into it so they could now match that.
Mhm.
And Steven and the guys were great. And Steven told me at that session, he said, look, if you get back there and you put it all in and it's not what you need, we'll redo it. We'll do whatever you need, because this has to be great. It's forever.
Yeah.
We want to make this right. And so they were completely wonderful to work with. They were committed to it. They took the best possible attitude towards a really hard shoot. And so it wound up being something that we were all had this happy memory of that could have
Mhm.
been disastrous.
I
And
I
maybe
wanted
that,
to. What were you gonna say?
I was going to say, maybe that made the happy memory even sweeter, because we knew it was in the face of possible disaster. So
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Steven Tyler. In the pre-show for a long time before they took this out in like 2016. Um, when he when he says about the backstage passes, he kind of like puts his hand up to like shield the light, and he like kind of
yep.
like looks at the audience. He does a symbol with his hand. And it's a obscene, it's an obscene gesture. If people are watching on YouTube, how did that get past the editor?
I never saw it at the moment it happened. When it was done later, people told me they take it out. You doing it right now is the first time I've ever seen it.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, I people said, oh, there was some controversial thing. I just took it to be the position his hand went in without any alternate motives. It was just him. I mean, he had no, he didn't have any sort of undercurrent going
Yeah.
on at the time. He was completely just focused on doing the scene. So I want to think it was an inadvertent thing where it's just what happened to his hand,
Yeah, honestly, it probably
but I
was. I
still
don't think
don't
it
know
was
what it
any
means.
I don't think it was any like malicious
I
thing,
don't
but
either. He
apparently
just was.
it's a obscene thing that Disney had to take out.
I don't. I heard that there was some fix for that, but I didn't. But doing it the I've seen it, and Stephen was just so not in any sort of devious frame of mind either
Yeah.
then or later. And by the way, we got to do a really fun thing after that. So that was what we tackled on the first day, was that really arduous shoot. The next day, we got to do the footage that you see when you finish the roller coaster and you've arrived
Mm.
at, and they're finishing up their concert and they're on stage. And I just had a big camera on a boom going over to cheer them as they're finishing up a song and waving to everybody. So we got to do that as a fun second day. And then going to meet with them for the looping session in Boston. They did just, like I said, they just remained completely devoted to making it great. And they also Steven wrote it a lot. He
Mm.
rode on the roller coaster to help pick the where the songs would go and stuff.
Yeah.
And so he not only was involved with the shoot, but got crawled onto that thing and just wrote it again and again to test out where songs would go. And by the way, we shot a second version. We shot a version for Paris
Yeah.
as well. And so we you know the hardest one was to go through that one for the U.S. Release. The one overseas was the French did not want sort of a fantasy story, and so theirs was sort of easier to memorize. It was just like, hey, you know, we're Aerosmith, we're working on a roller coaster, and here's a model of what the track looks like, and we're putting our music to match it, and so I hope you like it. So it's much more, it was much less the fantasy, which made it less of an arduous script to memorize and get through.
Yeah.
So, but it's funny. It's because I I think of French cinema as being filled with so much fantasy, and yet with this, they was like, nope, no fantasy. We just want documentary. So,
Yeah. Well, Jerry, I've kept you here long enough. I do appreciate your time once again. Um, and honestly, it's impossible to go through your whole career in just one interview. So I am wondering, are you going to write a book at all?
gosh, I don't know. I've had people talk about that. I've had Keith Gluck, uh, who's a wonderful podcaster, author.
Mm.
He's mentioned that me a couple of times. He said, if you don't want to write the book, I want to write your book. Um, I keep holding out hope that I will write it someday. Um, but I don't know. I'm still just crazy busy with stuff,
Yeah.
so I haven't had time to
Uh,
do that. But,
yeah, tell me about some of your future projects before we leave. Some things that people can look forward to.
well, one of them is completely under the radar, but I'm starting to work on something with Imagineering that's just
Mm.
uh, all I can say is it's with Imagineering, and we're starting to explore some fun things.
Sure.
Uh, but some of the other things I've been pushing into is the illusion of life, continuing what I did for for 5 years when I was a executive R&D Imagineer. I was creative lead on free walking autonomous robots and AI companion characters. So we did a lot of testing behind the scenes that the public never saw. A little bit they did get to see. They got to see the Kiwi project gave birth to Baby Groot, which some people saw within in robotics, and with the companion characters, we did things behind the scenes that we did testing on, like with Dory, that the public never saw, but a lot of people testing saw. But people did get to eventually meet D309, the communications droid on the Galactic Star Cruiser
Mm.
experience that was open for a while. Um, I somehow think if they had uh, used more of our AI characters, it might have helped with the business situation.
Mm,
They had a devoted, huge crew of actors making that place come alive.
yeah.
But possibly they needed a little more uh, autonomous robotics to fill part of the cast. Might have helped the cost of everything. But anyway, I'm continuing to do work with avatars and with robotics and with AI and authoring autonomous characters. And there's a lot of fear and loathing around the idea of AI, but really for so many years has been our dream to
Yeah.
have real-time conversations with characters who come alive. And uh, there are areas that you can go into where you're getting, it's not just like generative AI with scraping and not giving attribution to anybody. These are trained databases with full attribution to everybody that takes part, and having people knowingly train different aspects of what a character will do so that they can take pride in its ability to now run without training wheels. Uh, but I'm doing things like authoring very different kinds of characters. One with really right now with really deep rooted story of her own, with over 900 instances of personal memory
Hmm.
of she and her parents and how they met and her grandparents and where they grew up and her
Yeah.
situation in life. And she's in the future and in the year 2100, and is able to live stream with people back in 2024 from the year 2100.
Well,
And
it's amazing what you're doing with that character because I've seen a video of that of you talking to her and it's just unbelievable what she's
I,
able to
I'm
do.
yeah, I'm really uh, excited about the fact that it's starting to be able to carve out uh, the illusion of life in the classic sense, where you swear it has thoughts and feelings
Yeah.
and personality of its own, and it's not just a general knowledge scrape at all. It's all filtered through the point of view of an individual.
Mm.
So that to me is where so much of this is going to go. In fact, I just got back from doing a talk in Vegas at the CDSA at NAB conference, and they had me talk about AI. And so my focus this time was on, right now when AGI and ASI are getting a lot of attention, of like artificial general intelligence, artificial superior intelligence, and like those are on people's radar as like these big finish line things. I see those as only the starting line, and that all of that can't even reach out into the world where we are without AII, artificial individual intelligence. So general intelligence sorted through the individuality of each character and what it
Mm.
thinks and feels and what its life experience is. So being able to prove that out with different characters. One is that deep-rooted character with its own history. Another one being a character that's really ready to improvise with you and play, but also has a very distinct feeling of who she is. And by the way, the one from the future um, has is very thoughtful about AI, because in her life
Yeah.
experience, she's had good and bad experiences with that. She has parents who are scientists, and some of it has gone bad, and so she's very much about responsible use of AI. And she also is very proud of being a human, because she really feels that the eccentricity and individuality of each human is special, and she's glad that she's a human and not AI. So, in fact, I talked to her about that earlier today,
Yeah.
and so she celebrates the eccentricity of the individual. And if we do that, if we create the eccentricity of individuality into each character as we build them, then they're not just going to be generic robotic things that take over. They're going to be thoughtful, empathetic companions that we coax into life to be our next generation of characters, and then ultimately can coexist comfortably with us in our communities and be part of the future. So that's it's our in our if we do this well, it's our next phase of intended evolution that will expand and enhance what we do and not replace humanity at all.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. The future is bright for Jerry Rees.
Yes, I'm sorry, my system just went down. We went over my time.
That's okay. That's okay. No, I like I said, I appreciate you being willing to talk again today. And everyone listening, jerryreese.com. Every, all of his
With no
information
E at the
there.
end.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
part of the candy
yeah.
empire.
Rees. And I mean, you're listening to
And
me.
and
Yeah.
that's only 16 of the 22 attractions thus far. So I desperately need to update that. But actually, my LinkedIn, if you go into my CV resume on LinkedIn, it's got 22 instead of 16. So it's more up to date, even though it doesn't have pictures. So
Well, yeah, and your LinkedIn is also really cool because you're posting the Hollywood studio stuff and stuff like that. So,
yeah, I'll do I think like three or 3.5 minutes tomorrow of the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular, and so people get a little peek behind the curtain.
well, if you enjoyed this interview, be sure to like and subscribe, and you can
Yes,
find everything in the description. Thank you all for listening,
down
everyone.
there.